Hello my friends! If you're new here, my name is Rachel and welcome to the channel, and if you are returning, hi, welcome back. It's so nice to see you again. It may be a bit of a surprise, but today's video is the final speed build of 𝒷𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎. We have just a handful of villager homes left, so I decided to bundle them together in one long video. We'll be building out Eric's lumberyard, Greta's apothecary cottage, and Doby's hermit hideout. I cannot wait to dive in and polish off these last few areas, so come and join me as we build on �𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎 one last time. So while we start on the pathing leading to Doby's home, I want to tell you a little bit about what I had in mind for a storyline. So Doby's home is going to be decorated as a naturalist's retreat, and I gave him a pretty large area to call his own. The information on Doby's Wikipedia page states that he has the nature hobby, and some features also point to him being a writer, like his Happy Home Paradise request being a Zen writing retreat, or how the interior of his home is decorated, and how his RV camper is also decorated in the Welcome Amiibo update from New Leaf. I wanted to lean into that natural artistic idea for him and decided that Doby would be a Renaissance man, basically meaning that he has interests in multiple creative forms. I like the idea that maybe Doby used to live in a large city like London and worked as a philosophy professor before deciding that he wanted to spend his golden years tucked away in his own little pocket of nature. Of course, it sucks that he chose an island that is stuck in perpetual winter, but in my head, Doby loves to write poetry, he enjoys watching waves crashing along the beach near his home, jotting down the different types of birds that he finds nesting in the woods, and painting impressionist landscapes. Doby is such a special villager to me because he's one of the few that I feel like deviates from the norm of villager designs and embraces his age as a cute quirk, and I wish that there were more villagers that fit into different age ranges. Like, I would love to see a cute grandma villager, and I feel like Greta is the closest thing that we have to a grandma adjacent villager in the game, but just imagine a cute little grandma core island set in the spring with a bunch of old villagers just hobbling around. I feel like it would be such a cozy vibe. It would be really nice to see Nintendo bring back some of the villagers from the older games, or some of the Japanese exclusive villagers that came with the original release of Animal Crossing. A lot of people think that Animal Crossing started on the GameCube, but it actually shipped first on the N64 and was a Japanese only release before being ported and updated for international release, and visiting tropical islands was a feature even back then, and a lot of the exclusive villagers were islanders that you could interact with, and Doby was actually first featured as one of those islanders, which is super cool and feels really full circle. But now I'm building out his house toward the back, and as you can see, I'm adding a secondary structure here using a gazebo and some storefronts. I like the idea that Doby has maybe an old garden shed on his property that he converted into a space to store his art supplies or be a little reading nook, and to give it the feeling that this is more like a rural estate instead of just a hermit shack at the back of the island. I tried to also make sure I gave some nods to his Zen retreat request and Happy Home Paradise by adding the cypress tub, even though �𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎 isn't necessarily a Zen inspired island. For some reason, Doby always gives me hermit vibes, and whenever I have him on an island, I really enjoyed tucking him in a corner near some beautiful scenery, because if I was as old and grumpy as him, that's how I would want to spend my time. But we're just going through now and softening the landscape with some different shrubs and flowers to make it feel integrated into the surroundings. I'm also adding some garden beds for Doby to do his own gardening, since he probably doesn't get into town too much to re-up on his groceries and supplies. We are now building out this little area on the left-hand side of Doby's property, and I really love how cozy this spot turned out. Once we work on Greta's house up above, this is something that you'll be able to get a beautiful sightline of from her home, and I just really enjoy the idea of Doby and Greta being neighbors and that they would appreciate each other's company since they're such kindred spirits. Since Doby is a bit older, I feel like maybe he's prone to things like arthritis with the cold weather, and maybe Greta creates like tinctures and poultices for him to use from the herbs that she grows in her gardens or from the woods beyond her home, and in return, Doby gives her pieces of art that he paints. The land outside of the town of �𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎 seems like the type of place that's very hostile, and things like money have little value, so the villagers instead help each other out through things like bartering for different supplies that they may need. It's a hard type of living, but it's also one that I feel like really lends itself to the beauty of human nature, and that at the core, we all exist to love each other. Humans aren't meant to live alone, but instead rely on the help of others and spread kindness. But then again, this is Animal Crossing, and these villagers are technically animals, but hey, aren't we all just animals at the end of the day? But back to the build, you saw me cover that rocky outcropping in tall garden rocks and stone tablets, and that's because I found this amazing design code on Pinterest that looks like a very interesting landscape painting that I thought I could turn into an art reference for Doby. I think the painting is meant to be rocks just coming out of the water, and since the stones look a bit hazy at the bottom of the painting, I had this pretty cool idea to use these wheat fields as kind of like that haze that you can see in the painting. It was really difficult trying to find a code that looked like a painting in progress, and not to mention that I wanted the painting to be dark and gloomy since the island is very melancholic. I really wanted to fill Doby's yard with these different types of art pieces, but all of the art codes I could find were very much cottagecore, and while I consider these 3 builds to fall under the umbrella of cottagecore, it's definitely done in a lot colder of a color palette. Now, you saw me put some of the smaller touches around the property, and I really love seeing it all come together. I absolutely loved using the familiar statue next to the little pond because the patina on that item is such a beautiful shade of blue, and I know that it'll look even cooler during the nighttime beauty shots. I really wanted to give Doby a spot to do sculpting or maybe pottery work, but I got so carried away that I ran out of room in his little yard space. That's okay because I love how it all turned out. I am now trying to fill out the peninsula area off to the side here. I scooched over here to give myself a little bit of a break, but I was struggling so hard trying to figure out how to decorate the peninsula. I didn't really factor it into the planning of the island, and I didn't really try and decide what I wanted to do with it, so when it came time to decorating, I had no clue how to fill it in. I just decided that I wanted it to be very forested and kind of just make it look like there is more land off to the side. I decided that I wanted to give Doby a little storage shed that I will later turn into a little laundry spot, and maybe the storage shed is supposed to be kind of like an outhouse. I feel like the wooden storage container definitely has like outhouse vibes. It's giving me Shrek Swamp. It's giving cozy yet rustic, you know, all the good vibes. I really liked layering it with the stone fence because I really do feel like it makes it feel like a very polished area, and I am just going through and trying to integrate things into the landscape yet again with some more design codes. You know me, I don't like to leave any open tiles. You saw that I added the old wash tub, and that is it for this spot. After a few Treasure Island trips, I am back to tossing on my construction gear and getting the pathing out of the way for Greta's house. I want to mention that this video is a bit different from my others, and not only is it sped up faster than I would normally have it because my original edit was like an hour long, but these 3 builds were all done in real time as well. I've mentioned in the past that I usually pre-build all of my areas and then tear it all down before rebuilding it on camera, but I decided that for this final set of houses, I wanted to try and do it all from scratch so that you could see my initial design structure. While I did cut out some of the indecisive bits to help with the screen time, I'm actually really proud of how everything turned out. There are some things that I will change before the beauty shots and some smaller details that I plan on tweaking before we do our final island tour next Sunday, but like I said, I'm really proud of how everything turned out. I've said a million times before that this island was a huge test of my design capabilities, and that seriously could not be a truer statement. 𝒷𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎 is so outside of the realm of what I'm used to doing in Animal Crossing, and while I enjoy a challenge every once in a while, it definitely pushed me to my breaking point a few times. It's always bittersweet to leave an island behind because I've poured so many hours into creating these landscapes and planning out these builds, but I'm also so ready to explore our next island and all that our new theme will have to offer. I am also very excited for the island tour since there are a handful of areas that are still a secret for you guys, but if you want to get a sneak peek of what's to come in the tour video, I'll be posting some pictures of those hidden gems over on my Instagram at 𝒷𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎, where you can get a little preview of all of my builds. We're now starting to build out Greta's little yard area, and I really like the idea of creating this little garden archway with the faux gate and using the imperial screen and having it act as a boundary between her home and the woodlands beyond. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but Greta is an apothecary, and my overall storyline for her is that she used to live in the town, but once the local pharmacist opened up, people stopped coming to her apothecary shop. Over time, the older villagers passed, and Greta became a more enigmatic figure. The townspeople began rumors that she was a witch and that she couldn't be trusted. Greta grew tired of the gossip and just moved herself into a cottage at the edge of the island, where she has cultivated the natural land to suit her needs even in the dead of winter. The few townsfolk who don't fear her still come and trade supplies for the natural remedies that she offers, and otherwise Greta enjoys her solitude. She finds peace in literature and collecting old artifacts and spending time with Doby, who humors her with long philosophical conversations. I really love Greta as a villager and wish that there were more mouse villagers in game with interesting designs like hers. When I was younger, I used to play Animal Crossing Wild World, and Penelope was a villager that I vividly remember loving when she was in my town, and since then I've always loved the mouse villagers in theory, but I always struggled to find island themes that fit the interesting array of mice. I tried to design her yard in a bit more of a holistic approach, including things like the square bathtub, some gyroids, a few garden beds, curving natural pathways, and I even gave her a little outdoor kitchen in a shed much like Doby's. But now I'm just going through and finally putting down some pathing underneath some of the items. This is probably the biggest bad habit that I have when designing in-game, because I will usually figure out where I want the items to go first before deciding on the pathing, and that's mostly because it's hard to really visualize an area by just doing the pathing. In my usual video format, I always try to tackle all of the pathing first, so that way I'm not placing and picking up items over and over again, but this is supposed to be a more realistic look at my true designing process. But here we are, just putting some finishing touches in front of Greta's house, and as you can see, of course, Doby and Lyman have been walking all around this build. They got into a couple of fights, which was as funny as it was annoying because they were just stomping all over the place. But I have some very big good news. Lyman has officially asked to move off of Bleakmore, which, like, the timing could not be more perfect because I have been struggling trying to get Fang because Lyman just refuses to move off of the island. But I can finally get our last dreamy before releasing the dream address. Took me over 2 months, I think. I think we started this island back in December, but yeah, it took me a while and we finally got him off the island. But rambling aside, this is everything for Greta's yard, and I am so happy with how this whole area turned out. But we are now moving on to the final area of Bleakmore, Eric's carpenter cabin and lumberyard. Of course, pathing is always my beginning step, so I'm extending the pathing that I've already established off screen toward his yard. Eric's home is in an interesting spot, nestled above the back left beach and tucked behind the town of Bleakmore. I think that of all of these areas, this spot turned out the coolest and was one that I was excited to put together even before we began working on the island. I have seen so many renditions of this type of build on more Christmas-oriented winter islands designed as like a Christmas tree farm, but I wanted to try and make a version that would fit into the vibe of Bleakmore. It was no easy task because this isn't the largest area on the island, but I really enjoy working in these smaller yards. I find that if I give myself too much space for a build, I can get overwhelmed really quickly, so a great way to try and combat that is to shrink the size of the space that you're working with. You'll be surprised to see what innovative ways you can achieve your original vision in a smaller blueprint. Now, while we start figuring out pathing and where I want the tree farms to go, I want to talk a little bit about this part of the island and Eric's backstory. Eric is a villager with the nature hobby, so whenever I have him on an island, I always try to give him a yard full of bugs and plants, so this time around I decided that having this lumberjack sort of profession made a lot of sense. Winter islands don't really feel complete unless they have a good old tree farm, so I like to think that timber and processed lumber are probably a very lucrative product that could be something of an export for the island. Logging and sadly deforestation became very prevalent during the first industrial revolution as cities began to grow exponentially and trees were cut at a faster rate than they could grow back. And while this is a grim fact of history that still has negative effects on the world today, it does fit with the historical framework that we've set up for Bleakmore. While I like to believe that Eric cares about nature and maybe that's something that drove him to operate a more sustainable logging yard, it's the sort of business that someone would have to do in a town that is stuck in the midst of winter. I knew I wanted to have his home framed by these large patches of dark dirt that hold the cedar trees, and I would have liked for this first plot to be a bit bigger since I could only house a few trees in here, but I think that it still looks really cozy in the end. I'm extending it slightly and then I'm going to use some barbed wire fencing to frame it out. I think that of all the fencing in game, I love the barbed wire fencing the most. It's seriously so versatile for so many different island themes, and I love items that appear a bit more imperfect and full of character like this one. But we can move on to the framing of the second patch of dirt on the other side of Eric's house, and this one is a bit different in function as well. It's going to serve as more of a workshop yard where maybe Eric processes the felled trees. I'm leaving a patch open without fencing so that way we can create a faux building to act as his shed, warehouse, or shop, or whatever you want to call it. But now I'm planting the first bit of trees in this area, starting with some of the cedars and layering them with smaller ones. On this second patch, I'm planting hardwoods and cutting them down to look like spots where Eric has been getting work done, or maybe he's using these stumps as the base for splitting wood. I'll be adding dropped wood piles later as a bit of environmental storytelling, and I also love using items that create the little word bubbles that pop over your villager's head. It's really cute for photo opportunities and just to give some variation to the items. I'm going through now and placing down my first round of smaller foliage in some areas just to really help fill out some of these tucked away corners. So now we are moving on to the final segment of today's speed build, which feels so crazy. I am just going through and placing down some final items and making some last minute pathing changes. I also want to apologize again for jumping all around the place. Do let me know if the speed on this video is enjoyable or if it's a bit too much. I like being able to include more footage with the sped up option, but I also worry that running around and opening my menu over and over might be a little difficult to watch, so do just let me know. Right now I am building out a little tool shed for Eric to house his different fertilizers and pieces of equipment before jumping back to fill out his yard. I really enjoyed using fallen logs as like felled trees and just trying to pack this area in as much as I could with different flowers and foliage just to really help his house feel like it was secluded in the woods. We're now moving to the workshop where I'm layering my usual preferred items for faux buildings. I'm starting with some storefronts and using some antique wardrobes behind them to look like the actual depth of a building. Layering two storefronts together right here would also look really good in this type of build, but since this is the last area I was trying to use up as many items as I already had in my storage. Since this is a lumber yard, I had to include a simple panel with my favorite little stacked log design on them to act as like maybe a little shed where Eric is holding some trimmed timber. And I'm finally dropping those wood stacks like I mentioned, and I love how the lighter shades of brown bring a bit of warmth to this area. I am now just bouncing back and forth between a few areas as I try and figure out what's the best orientation for the collection of items that I've been saving up for this build. While I had a lot of fun working on Eric's yard, I was definitely in the groove after having Doby and Greta's house as warm-up. I kind of forgot that I was recording, which is why I'm a bit all over the place. I've mentioned before that I have ADHD, so my brain works in short bursts of inspiration instead of a more linear design approach, so I'll open my inventory, search for one item, but get sidetracked with another and have to drop everything I'm doing to place it in a different spot. It feels super satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't really make for a very relaxed speed build. Here I have some more pathing inspiration, and I really love that it's now finally reaching that stage where the vision is truly coming together. We have a couple more minor changes to add to the surrounding landscape, but this is pretty much the overall finished design. I'm really just trying to go through and use up the final scraps of landscaping pieces and design items that I have in my inventory, while also interspersing everything with some design codes just to help fill in those in-between gaps. I felt that the smaller tree farm was lacking some items, and oh my gosh, I am so glad I could finally find a spot for the Plain Lights party arch. I miss using that item so much. I used it a million times on our last island. Now I'm just shuffling things around in the secondary dirt patch because I wanted to include a DIY bench of some kind since the smaller tools on that item make sense for a build like this. I was definitely having some trouble with the pirate barrels, but I figured it out in the end before putting the fences back together. But I am just once again using a combination of moss and design codes and finally placing some axes as the last little finishing touches to this area. And now without further ado, let's go and take a look at the beauty shots. Alrighty, my friends, that is everything for the speed build and the beauty shots. I really hope that you enjoyed this final build video of 𝒷𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎. In my head, I always think that there are so many more builds left before the final video, but it always creeps up on me, both with 𝒷𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎 and now 𝒷𝓊𝓃𝓃. Thank you all for joining me on this little snowy adventure. It was definitely a very different island for me and pushed me out of my comfort zone, but I hope that it deviated enough from the usual winter islands to help inspire you to dive into something different in your own games. You all have shown me so much support for 𒷷𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎, both here on YouTube as well as over on Instagram, and I can't say thank you enough. I want to give the biggest, warmest welcome to 𝒷𝓊𝓃𝓃𝓎, who became the newest baby bunny and joined my channel memberships. If you're new here and enjoy my content and want to help support it, consider becoming a member today by hitting the join button down below and seeing all of the special perks that you can get. However, liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to the channel if you're not yet subscribed also helps me out a ton, so hit subscribe and become part of our cozy community today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.